help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.
Welcome to What's the Rush podcast with me. I'm Rebecca Rush, athlete, entrepreneur, and an explorer, and also your teammate on this adventure. And today we welcome one of my favorite humans in the entire world, Dr. Andy Walshe. Or Walshe, as a lot of people call him. He's an Aussie, a passionate surfer, father, husband, and he's also one of the leading minds in human performance for his entire career. He currently is the chief performance officer at Liminal Collective, a group that I'm part of. It's a global community of high performance experts who are really trying to demystify performance and democratize performance for more people. And he's also the former director of human performance at Red Bull. That is where we started our long-term relationship and did some fun adventures together. And he also worked and designed performance programs for the U.S. ski and snowboard team, the Australian Institute of Sport, and he started his career. I learned this the other day as a PE teacher for kindergartners, 5-year-old kids, which was maybe one of the most challenging parts of his career. But he studied elite performance in athletes, military, music, business, esports, and has designed really amazing, unique performance models to help people operate at their best. He is someone who has impacted my career probably more than anyone else. I was thinking about this today, that we've known each other quite a long time, and you've impacted my career from an athlete performance level, but also as a business person and as a mentor and as a peer in the athletic space. And so welcome, Walshe. I'm excited to talk to you today, and I can't wait to get into it.
No, thank you, Rebecca. You're way too kind. But both ways, we learned from each other all those years. So
Yeah,
I'm
we
excited to
did.
have a conversation today. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Well, maybe that's a good place to start. Let's talk about some of our adventures together with Red Bull, because quite honestly, I was a Red Bull athlete for 22 years. You were the head of human performance for how many decades there? Quite a long time, I think, right?
I was, it was over 10 years. Sort of came in the earlier phases of what they call the more mature Red Bull at the time, but definitely we were on a trajectory of growth then. But yeah, back in the beginning there in 2007, started at Red Bull, and that was a real shift in my journey as well at that point in time. So it was a great time. I look back very fondly on those 10 years for
Ah,
all the amazing fun stuff we had the opportunity to participate in.
it was my first introduction. I came in as an independent athlete, and I've never had like a elite team, or not like a football team or a typical team sports. I didn't have access to people like you, and came into Red Bull, and all of a sudden the doors were opened with you and your team, and the best of the best, and everything from nutrition to I'd never even heard of microbiome until I talked to you. And like, you opened my mind, you and your team, to not just working harder as an athlete and like how many watts can you push out or how much weight can you push, but this holistic approach to an athlete. And I know you have your human performance model that has like 12 different things, the aspect of an athlete, from mindset to spirituality to your career, and then also your skill set and your sport. But you really opened my mind that it's that performance is about a lot more than how hard you try. Can you kind of talk about the model that you've created, and maybe some of the pillars of it? And then I want to talk about some of the crazy experiments, because you were given kind of carte blanche to really design tests and experiments on us, to sort of prove some of your theories. And I don't think you could have done that kind of testing in like any other sort of lab. But so
Uh,
introduce us to the human performance model first, your human performance model, and then let's get into some of the nitty gritty a little bit.
yeah. Look. The modeling came about, and it's sort of. I originally saw it way back in my undergrad days. There was a national coaching conference in Australia, and this trainer by the name of, he was really big in the periodization back then. So it was part of a national event, and he presented a model based on just on the physiology, with this sort of idea of human endurance or performance in the middle and all these physiological elements. And I thought, wow, that's great. But what about all the other parts? So we came up with a rough model, which is the one people see. That's that generic version that covers, the skills and the physiology and the strength and the medical program and the psychology or cognitive program, but also the character, the creativity, the spirituality in terms of purpose, X factor. So that model became that generic framework by when you look at any talent, this is a starting point, but it's by no means the model that they built. So as you know, every athlete, yourself included, builds their own model in that conversation. That's a reference or starting point. As you said, it brings awareness to all these other opportunities for helping and supporting. But then we sit down specifically on with every talent and design their own specific model, which allows us to then manipulate the various factors or work across the different factors that they choose or determine are important. And through that, you start to reframe their performance in the broader perspective, as you say. I think the easy stuff is the stuff you measure, the push-ups, the sit-ups, the running, the physicality, the watts, whatever. And that's where we tend to focus back especially the early days of my career. But then very quickly as you work with, let's say, non-athlete performers, artists, musicians, cognitive, cyber, esports, business executives, there's a physical element that's obviously very important, but there's also these other bigger contributors. And as you get into those layers of character and creativity and other elements, you really see that everybody can benefit from that holistic approach. And that's sort of how the model evolved, if you like. And that was fun, because at Rebel we had at the time, I think when you and I were there was around 1,000 athletes. I think we netted about 160 to 170 sports. So there was never this position of, hey, let's come in and help you be better. It was literally, let's come in and partner with you to understand what you need and try and provide world-class expertise in those areas of importance or critical factors. And that partnership means we were learning from every different type of performer in the way that allowed us to do that at a level that no one had seen before.
I love that you said that, because actually when I was reflecting on our relationship and how impactful it's been for me, you were, came in as this athlete and came in as kind of with a model of like, the performance team is going to teach me how to perform. And
Yeah.
I love that you say partnership, because literally you were one of the first people in my entire career who asked me questions and who kind of, you invited me to give speeches in places, and you helped me realize that what I was learning and my skill set as an athlete was worth more than a gold medal or a podium, that there was actually something credible to what I was learning that could be applied in other places. And I remember very well that you invited me to speak at South by Southwest, to be part of Liminal Collective. And it gave me the confidence to be like, wow, I'm developing a skill set that is for more than just winning. And so I really appreciate that partnership view of anyone in any relationship. There's not like the teacher and the student. We're always crossing over, hopefully, between student, teacher, teacher, student, and we're sharing our knowledge. And it's what I love about the way that you approach your work. You weren't telling me what to do. You were genuinely curious about how my brain was operating and like how we were doing the things. I want to get into some of your favorite testing. I mean, I had the chance to do a couple really cool, performance under pressure camps, and you'd kind of devise these crazy experiments with us. And then sometimes we get invited, sometimes we wouldn't. I have to say, one of the sort of biggest regrets of my career, and I had no control over this, is that I was not invited when you dropped 4 elite female athletes into the Australian outback for 10 days alone to see what would happen. I wasn't invited, and I was really bummed out because I was like, I could have nailed that. And you told me you didn't invite me because you thought I wouldn't be uncomfortable enough. You're like, no, we're not inviting you to that one.
Well, that was it. Those sort of, they were more, and they, you call them experiments, but those experiences or evolutions were designed for very specific reasons. And as you said, given we had no adult supervision at Red Bull at the time, we were able to do things in the performance space that you wouldn't get away with professional team or organization, because there's so many other people invested in that conversation. But we were really given carte blanche to push the boundaries. And like you said, that Akron experience was a deep immersion in challenging environment. I remember sitting down talking about that and saying, look, Rebecca's going to find this too easy, given your background and what you've already signed up for and what you're already doing. We had to create a harder version of yours, but unfortunately by that time that Rebel had shifted track and gone another direction. And but I think that's exactly right. We created those training immersions, those training evolutions, to really push beyond the classic testing, which is measure how much, again, on the bike, the wattage and how long, and your lactate and your classic stuff. Now, not to say that isn't important, but we've done that for 50 years. We've learned a lot about getting you in shape. And to your point, you know more about getting yourself in shape than we do. And that's that partnership conversation. If you're best in class at what you do, I have no, let alone right, I have no way to actually understand or comprehend what you're doing at that level. So the best I can do is try to understand you in that space. And then, of course, I've been around a long time, I've probably seen other versions of what you're trying to do in other organizations. And you remember, we just pass those through and say, well, have you thought about training this way? Have you thought about doing this? Or have you thought about looking at your performance models in this lens? And that way you are learning from all the best practices we've collected from other communities. And it's that partnership where we go back and forth. And I was literally saying to another colleague yesterday, if we do our job well, you shouldn't need us after a couple of years. We can probably introduce a lot of new stuff up front, but then, as you know, we just drip feed you the latest and greatest. Oh, we've seen this new, maybe it's a new nutritional supplement or something. And you go, look, I think it might be in your particular world something worth looking at. And I think at that level you were at, and obviously most of the Rebel athletes were in that same bucket, is, there's no real model on how to develop you because you're already at the tip of the spear, you're at the top. So everything's a learning exercise. And I think it's very disingenuous, especially in our field of work, where people come and go, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to do this to you. The human body just doesn't work that way. And there's some basic stuff for sure, but the reality is it's always a learning process. Experiment a little, try things, learn. You're never going to get out in your world of riding the bike for less than 20 hours a week. You got to do the yards, but that's easy, quote unquote. That's the math that makes sense. Then it's the extra things that we can do to sharpen you. So it was a great time at Rebel because we had room to really push on that extra stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, I wasn't chosen for that Australian expedition because it was too much in my wheelhouse. And, I was chosen for some other things that were way outside my comfort zone, like going in the velodrome. I'd never ridden in a velodrome and doing 1,500 meter like sprints, for an athlete who's used to going for 24 hours. So you intentionally put me in areas where I wasn't comfortable and didn't feel at home. And that one experiment that we did that was really interesting. It was with a bunch of neuroscientists and some cool people, and you were trying to uncover, does the brain or the body quit first? Is there a central governor in the brain? And so, do you want to talk about that experiment a little bit? How you laid it out? And
well, I think for your listeners, this idea of bringing diverse and obtuse experiences to world-class talent really does make them think differently. So the idea is to get you to see a perspective that you haven't. And with that perspective and learning, we can challenge you a lot quickly. If I wanted to ride you up and down a mountain, I'd have to do it 100 times and you'd still probably be going. But if I throw you into a very unique or, say, as we call obtuse training environment where you don't have a history or a perspective or even the tools, you have to learn again. You have to get back into that beginner's mindset. And I think that was a hallmark of how we understood that the best talent in the world could always be challenged if we came at them very differently. And so all the experiences from the stand-up to the improv to the water work to the mountain work, if you weren't a mountain athlete, all those things became that mantra. That experiment you referenced, that week-long training course, you remember we were trying to answer that question, why do you stop?
Yeah.
When you think about it, we know a lot about endurance training and the physiology of the human and years and years of research. But when you actually ask that simple question, what makes you stop? You get basically two camps. And I haven't kept up with the research. It might have changed. So my apologies to all the budding physiologists out there, but does your brain shut you down or does your body shut you? So central versus peripheral governor. And it's hard because understanding why you stop might mean we can turn that thing on or off that forces you to stop. So it was a great way to bring a unique training environment. You remember at the altitude, you're up at Death Valley, or up in the
Yeah.
Sierras and down Death Valley again. The velodrome where we actually faked a time trial for you. Remember, we had the timing light go. You thought it was your average time, but we actually sped it up so that LED light that circled the track, you were
Yeah.
trying to keep up with. You're like, shit, this is harder than I imagined, and it was because we'd made it faster than you'd
Yeah.
imagine. And all
Yeah.
those conversations, I think, all those things really do is lead to a better conversation with the athletes and the talent, and people start to explore more deeply things that they've always probably assumed or known, or in some cases just never even brought the question forward. And I think that's when you probably remember that it was the evenings when all of you from all different walks of life in the endurance space were talking and sharing, that you probably got more out of that than you actually did the actual task. And that's the idea.
Yeah.
The task triggers a conversation. The conversation leads to potentially shared insights or at a minimum, understanding of another person's world who's at the top of their game. And through that collaboration, you start to improve. Again,
Yeah,
that's
there
a
were
very elite program.
that program. I mean, I feel so grateful to be part of it, not just for my athletic performance, but like I said in the intro, for my lifelong performance as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as a partner. So some really big takeaways from that really intense week, and we were doing repetitive over and over and over again time trials, inside, outside, pushing on a leg press with all these electrodes, up on our head, and then we'd sit in a chair and sort of meditate and rest for 10 minutes. And like there was a lot going on of like stimulation rest, managing the nervous system in ways. And there were a couple really big takeaways that I took from that. And they were both situations where you lied to us, and we didn't know what was going on. And one was outside at Mammoth, where you said, we had done this time trial, great. I don't know, it was like a 20-minute time trial sort of a thing. We come back to camp, we thought we were all done, and you're like, great, you're gonna do it again. And we thought we were done, first of all. So first of all, I was pissed because you lied and you said we were finished and we weren't. So I had gone all out on what I thought was the last one. And then, of course, you said, we're going to do one more and we're not going to tell you how long it is. And so it was an indeterminate amount of time. And I think you even taped over our Garmin head unit, so we couldn't actually see the distance. We couldn't see the time. You just had to go until the end. And that was a really interesting for me twist on the mindset of expectation. And the second that's related that was really impactful for me was that on that velodrome where our last thing of the whole week, we're going to race our best time, and you're racing this LED light, and my coach Dean was there, a whole bunch of people on infield yelling, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to beat my light. And I was super motivated. And I'm with my light, then I fall behind my light, and I sort of had some negative conversation for about a lap and a half of like, oh, I suck, I'm not gonna la, la. And then I sort of sparked back up again, like, no, okay, I'm gonna try to chase it again. And I caught back up a little, but I finished behind my light, and I was disappointed. And sure enough, it was my fastest time ever. You had lied to us, and the light was going faster than our fastest time. But I came away from that going, wow, what if I hadn't lost focus for that lap and a half in the middle and beat myself up? I would have blown my best time out of the water. And just the power of the mind. And I really love that that's your training is, I mean, I know there's all the pillars of the human performance model, but I feel like the frontier really, like you said, we know how to train watts, we know periodization, we know nutrition, but the mind seems like the untapped, becoming more tapped, but it is the untapped frontier of performance.
Yeah. And you remember Per was the main instigator of that program at the time, Per Lunsford leading that. And I think those are the conversations that we needed to get to. So what was switching off? What was causing you to slow down? And in that case, we've shifted the expectations. We've shifted your reality, but that reality, you created a new reality in your mind. And the psychologists will unpack this stuff for hours, but it's an old trick that I'd learned, funnily enough, years and years earlier. Again, this is this transfer of knowledge effect. If you watch some of the selection events for some very unique government programs, military programs, and there's one particular event where they line all the candidates up and they go, run. That's it. That's the order. And if you're in that situation, you don't want to be last because it's probably a fail, but you don't know how hard you have to run to be in front, and you don't know how long they're going to run you. So I learned very quickly that shifting that domain around expectations, and it can be time, creating that uncertainty, which is all that is, in your mind really forces you to deal with that issue front on, and you have to then layer in, okay, in an uncertain world, what can I control? I control my preparation, the way I approach things, and my response to things. So you look at that and you go, wow, if I can start to navigate that space, I can really learn. And again, it's learning. It's all learning. You're all world class. You're already world champions. So it's how do we just bring that conversation forward? And I think that's the best part of those programs. You were shifting perspective. We're shifting, we're coming at you very differently. We're putting you in certain situations, in that case, very uncertain situations. And we're modifying a space for you that that you typically control. This many watts, this long, this far. Yeah. And we're taking all that away, and you're forced to then deal with that. And I think for us nowadays, it's even more profoundly important, because I think we get too caught up in the qualitative assessment and the data, and we're trying to measure everything. And the machine is taking on all the analysis, which is great. It does give us insight. But at the same time, the unknown unknowns of our human physiology, our performance, our mind, the ability for us to really explore an edge that gives us potentially even greater return on the investment. And that was, one of the underlying theses of all those programs, was keep encouraging people to challenge themselves in that way. On top of the 20 hours a week on the bike, sitting in the saddle, grinding out the watts. So it's almost like this is the frontier of those programs.
I mean, it's you, and I mean, you help Felix Baumgartner, jump from the stratosphere. You help Shaun White, develop his own personal template, mimicking, the Olympic half pipe course, and in all of those, are there, and you've worked with artists and special forces. Are there some themes that you see, like? What are your big takeaways from doing all of these kinds of learnings? Because I mean, you say you're curious, you want to learn from the athletes that you've worked with and the people that you've studied. What are the takeaways that you are pulling into Liminal Collective and into, like I said, democratizing performance for everyone? What do you take from those super high end, crazy elite studies that you've done?
Yeah, we did. We tried to look across all the portfolio of talent, across all the domains, and there's a few things that always stand out. I think start with as we call it, under the spirituality bucket, the idea of a purpose greater than yourself. And that can be anything. It can be family, friends. It can be a religion. It could be teammates. It could be for many people, just the idea of leaving a legacy behind. But the reality is, we see that as a common thread. There's something bigger behind them, driving them, and that's not always the case. Especially with the younger athletes, it might be money and fame at the early days, and that's okay. But eventually, we see the more mature talent develop that sense of a greater purpose or last. So I think that's important. We see us in their field. I've got to be careful here. In their particular field, a deep sense of self-awareness. Again, that may be not more broadly outside of the field of their activity. Sometimes there's a narrow focus to that, but and that self-awareness is a deep interoception. They definitely know how they respond and their triggers and what they're doing well and when they're doing well and why they're not doing well. And then there's still always room to grow, but we see that as a pattern. So I think there's a higher level of purpose. There's a deep sense of self and understanding, or a desire to understand self. I think there's a curiosity, like you said. I think these best, like yourself, there's always People will call it a beginner's mindset. I'd say it's even just a challenge mindset. What else can I do? What else is out there? What am I missing?
Yeah.
Always looking for that extra, marginal gain across the domain they're into. So I think you see that curiosity, that self motivation, that awareness all coming together, and usually they're the big takeaways. And ultimately, you'd like to see them have the sort of sense of character about doing it the right way, winning well, we call it. But that's not always the case. There's a lot of pricks and assholes who become number one in the world, and that's fine. And there's something to that, especially in the business and non-athletic world. But hopefully, at some point, people look back and say, "I want to be remembered for something beyond."
Do you have what is that for you? That aspect of purpose.
Yeah, I think for us now, it's become one was learning for many years, that curiosity, just always intrigued by what it really means to do what people like yourself do and understand that. But I think now it's how do we democratize? How do we give it all away? And I
Yeah.
think that democratization of performance is fascinating in this current era where
Yeah.
you have groups like the longevity movement rising, the biohacker movement rising, and in many ways, I love that it's pioneering a better sense of basic health. And funnily enough, it's a lot of the things they're doing. It's been part of the athletic world, as you know, for 30, 40 years. So it's sort of like watching the wheel kind of spin over again. But there's some new technologies emerging and some new insights that we're gathering in that space. But I think some of the simplest things about how do we actually take the best practices we have and give them back to for me to be the kids. How do we give the kids the tools, the power, the things that physically, mentally,
Yeah.
purpose-wise, etc. The challenge is, and this is the biggest issue with the human performance space and why it's so inauthentic in many cases, is that when you aren't doing a lot or you're not doing anything at a high level, let's take the biohacker movement as a generalization, probably piss off a lot of people here, but everything works. When you're not doing much, everything works. If you go for a
Yeah.
run, you get fit. If you pick up something heavy, you get strong. If you eat a little
Yeah.
bit, so they come up with these, but people get focused on the one thing they did and they begin to sell that out. And so there's no authenticity because there's no real history there. At your level, we take the opposite mindset. Nothing works
Mm.
because we have to understand you deeply and then figure out of all the things that could potentially work, what is the one thing or two things worth investing your time, energy, and effort in? So I think we run into a problem where, even though we have a lot of great lessons from the top talent in the world, when you're starting off at the beginning of that journey in sort of human performance or human optimization or health or longevity, whatever, everything works. And it's very hard for people to get behind the idea that no, even at that level, you are an N of one.
Mm-hmm.
You're very, very individually specific, and what works for you will, for the most return bang for the buck, will be very, very specific if you really want to look at it. But I can
Yeah.
sell you all sorts of widgets and gadgets and things and processes, and you'll buy them because you think I know what I'm talking about, which is probably the first mistake anybody will make. So the reality is that's the challenge we have, and that's the opportunity, is to start to understand more deeply what it really means to reach potential across all the domains, the quantitative and the qualitative, the spiritual, mind, spirit,
Yeah.
physicality, and then provide really good basic tools. And the most simplest things typically have the most impact. The simplest
Mm-hmm.
things have the best impact, especially at the beginning, and not get caught up with all the trends and patterns that people are obviously selling for.
Yeah, there's so much in there that I already feel like I could talk to you for 5 hours, and because I have, but there's so much in there. But I want to take um, the first episode, this whole podcast adventure. What's the rush? And it's intentionally called What's the Rush, and it's about taking a pause and slowing down, and what do you see in the spaces in between. And this was born out of my now 4-year long-term recovery journey from a concussion, the biggest injury of my life. It was career changing, life changing, in so many ways, and I really lost my way, and that was about 4 years ago. And you and the Liminal team were really critical in one, helping me find the right people and specialists to help me recover. But I completely lost my way and I stopped moving for the first time in my life. I stopped exercising. And then, of course, everything spiraled down from physical health, mental health, relationship health. My whole life basically was falling apart because I stopped moving. And I launched this to kind of I had to sit with myself. So you talk about interoception and an athlete really knowing themselves. It felt like I really knew myself. But on one level of that performance model that you talk about, yeah, I know exactly my heart rate. I can tell you what my heart rate is without even touching, feeling for my pulse. But I was very underdeveloped in some of the spirituality areas, mental health and brain health, nervous system regulation. And so I spent a few years really kind of having to learn about some of that stuff, which is great. And I launched this podcast thing as part of those discussions. And the very first episode, which is your friend, I asked Dr. Michael Gervais, to launch this podcast with me. And he laid the groundwork and he said, 3 ways, the best way to get to know yourself is meditation, journaling, and conversation with interesting people. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And that's what this podcast is. And while I was running today, I was going to bring this up to you. I'm like, I'm going to add a fourth that I really believe, and it's part of the core of what where I want to go in my work. I believe the fourth best way to get to know yourself is through sport, is through physical activity. Because that does then get more of that circle. People can sit and introspect and journal forever, and have conversations with interesting people. But if you don't get out and move, you don't actually learn your physical self. And that's where I was really skilled in that part, but had to develop the rest of it. And so I'm curious on your take of, here's what I believe. And I've developed this model that I'm launching based on my experience and a ton of my work with you, called the Athlete Operating System. And it's basically a framework that, taking what I know as an athlete and bringing that into more people, a framework of coaches, periodization, rest, pushing hard, but not too hard, challenging yourself. And the Athlete Operating System is a model that's come out of my concussion. But I really believe that sport is one of the best teachers in the world for us. And I'm curious what you see, like with the executives who you push them into a physical realm, even though they're trying to perform in the boardroom, but you make them hold their breath underwater. You make them go lift weights. You make them go do team running exercises together, sort of Navy SEAL kind of style. And so why do you take that physical pushing to help teach the lessons to take to the boardroom? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. No, I think your athlete system is great. I think the physicality of it, sport or adventure, or just being involved at a level of intensity with the physical self, really does reveal a lot about you, as you know. I think I agree with you 100%. And I think why we use that domain, again, comes back to some of that obtuse training. It's very hard to challenge a Fortune 100 executive in the boardroom. They've seen it all. They've been in front of the quarterly reports they're under the microscope a lot in that environment. So you can challenge them, you can put them a little bit out of their comfort zone there, but they still have a big toolkit of experiences and skills that they've used to navigate that space. Hence, they're in charge. What happens is when we take them outside, and maybe we just did that program. I think you were too busy, but we did that. We took the group on horseback up into the Sierras for 5 days, and that is one. It's just they're used to the 4 seasons, or better, and living. You know what it's like. You've lived that lifestyle. It shifts perspective for you very quickly. And then the physicality of it, it's not a baton death march or anything, but there's definitely more physicality in that than their normally experiences, and that shortens them up as well in that space. So we're basically getting to a very quick version of self-awareness by, in some respects, drawing down their what's the word I'm looking for? We're drawing down their sort of barriers, their sort of box, the sort of safety net. And they don't know how to navigate potentially this land navigation where there's a bit of cognitive work, but they're hiking across the mountains, and they don't know how to actually use a compass and a map, and so suddenly they're in this space where they're no longer the best or have a confidence level, and that just shifts perspective. It's not about, oh, let's make it hard so you're miserable. It's about, no, let's make you reset back to that idea of that really early challenge mindset. What can I learn from this experience, no matter what? What's that thing I can learn? And getting out of the idea that I know it all and have seen it all before, and that allows us very quickly to get them to a space where we can have that conversation. That's all it's about.
Mm,
So again, we could probably do it in a boardroom, but we'd have to have dozens and dozens of fake board meetings, and it's just too slow. But keep them up a bit, make the night sleep a little rough,
yeah.
get them out in nature where with no digital toys, so the detoxing from that. And suddenly,
Mhm.
they're like, oh, I haven't slept outside since I was a kid. I've haven't not you've been on my phone for this amount of time for 20 years in one case, and
Yeah.
now their perspective is already shifting and the natural environment is really forcing that change. And then that's all right, let's talk about what it is what's with that perspective, where are you, what are you doing, what are you about, and you have that conversation. And that sort of sometimes many of these people are in that transition phase, as you mentioned. They're moving from high level, high paying work to maybe another part of their journey. Well, that moment forces a transition where they go, I've been making a ton of money, being the top dog in the company for many years, and I'm really still, I don't have any great stories to tell in the nursing home, is how we put it. So you've got to create a few of those stories for the nursing home so that everyone doesn't just disappear when you start sharing what you did in your life. And we use that analogy and say, yeah, so you want to be, what can you do moving forward to bring some of that to life? So that's you've done it to death. You've done these adventures. You've had these experiences, and I think it's not just sport. I think it's actually just
Yeah.
getting out to a point where physically you're drained and you're letting go, and then you just literally are forced to relax and
Well,
shift.
I mean, I have done all these adventures, and I'm really proud of my sports career. But as I mentioned earlier, I basically completely lost my way in the last few
Yeah.
years and forgot everything that I knew, and had to develop a whole system to remind myself of what I knew, and talk to you
Yeah.
about, like, I don't know what to do. I'm super lost in the sort of proverbial woods. If I had been lost in regular woods, actual woods, that would have been a lot easier than sort of navigating the jungles of my mind and the sort of,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah. And I didn't do a good job of taking those tools and bringing them into another aspect. So I guess that's my question to you, is like, you can put these execs out camping in the wilderness and strip away some of those defense layers, those layers of the onion, so that they're more vulnerable, they're more open. But then how, when you plop them back into their setting, how do they keep that openness and that awareness and apply it on a different set of maps?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and it takes work. There's no way around it. You've got to integrate that stuff back in, and that's where lots of the experts we bring in are more attuned at that side of the equation, where there's regular conversations following, where you're just reminding. And I encourage these people, whoever they are, whatever the experience is, don't stop. Keep having the experiences. I think what we've seen over and above for most of these years, that they last about 6 months to a year, and then you tend to drift back quickly into a different way. But if you can keep reminding yourself of that through those conversations, and that's sort of what we call those sort of mentor programs that follow, where you're sitting down and you're kind of connected to 4 or 5 others who are doing the same, and you're following up on those conversations, and there's specific ways to integrate it into your lifestyle. But you're not going to take everything. You will default back a bit. But if you just take a couple of things and then they
Yeah.
become part of that new, and then 12, 18 months later, do something again, challenge yourself differently, put yourself out there. And I think that becomes the fun part of this journey, is that you're never there. There's never any, you
Yeah.
never cross
Yeah.
the finish line. You just, oh my God, I just got to keep going and keep trying. And that really is where we start to get into those conversations for these
Yeah.
people of what is it? What is important to you? How do you want to be remembered? What does it look like, in 20 years, when you're sitting in the rocking chair on the porch of the house telling your stories? What are those things you're going to really be proud of? And it's not always about great big adventures, as you know. It can be little
Yeah.
things. And I think to that point, that integration is the part that's the most challenging, because people lose when you're in it. You kind of are forced into it, and that's what we do a great job. But there's that you do have to follow up on that work, and you do have to spend time. And the best way we've seen is just creating a sort of ongoing conversation that.
Yeah. I
And
mean, it is, yeah. If I look at the athlete operating system template, it's like training. You've got to do regular training. You've got to have goals that you're shooting for. You've got to have teammates.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can't just have this experience and then go home, and it doesn't absorb that way.
It doesn't happen that way. People want that though. People
Yeah,
expect
they
I'm going
do.
here and
Oh yeah.
change my life, and maybe it changes your life's perspective
Yeah.
dramatically. But it won't change anything unless you do that work following it. So that's the
I
more
like that.
difficult.
It won't change your life, but it changes your life perspective. And then it's up to you with the perspective shift. What will you do with that?
And sometimes
I,
for many people, it's just a reminder, like you said.
yeah,
You had to
yeah,
remind yourself. You already knew. You just lost track of that knowledge and had to reimagine it again and resurface it for you.
yeah. This is something that's maybe relevant. We're about the same age. We've known each other 20 years, gone through different, highs and lows in our careers and different amazing achievements that we've all gotten to work together. But, part of the struggle, like during my concussion recovery, there were a few things that happened. I moved to a new place.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpectedly, my longest running contract, which was with Red Bull, 22 years. I'm super proud of that. But that ended a year post concussion, and I'm sitting here going, well, if I'm not a professional athlete, what am I? And what worth do I have? And I'll go back to thanking you for, continuing to reflect and be like, yeah, what you've learned is world class and can be taken everywhere. But I sort of forgot that. And where people are like, oh, well, when are you going to retire from being an athlete? And I hated the question so much. And I really had to think about it because it made me really mad. I've won all my Leadvilles in my 40s. I did the best expedition of my life, and I did ride trail by bike at 52. And, I had to really find the terminology that now I'm in a place I can admit I'm not a professional athlete, but I'm an athletic professional. Like, I'm never going to retire from being an athlete because it's the core of one, how I learn, how I access flow state, who my community is, the base of knowledge that I have. But I needed a perspective shift from the outside world of people being like, oh, what are you going to do next? What record are you going to break? To me being like, no, I want everyone to be an athlete. I'm going to continue to be an athlete. And I think the concussion of me losing track of that was actually really good for me in hindsight. The hardest things we can always say are the biggest lessons, but when you're in the middle of it, it feels pretty shitty. But that was a pretty big career transition for me. And I'm curious. I mean, you saw from the outside in, I had some pretty intimate conversations with you and some other people during some of those rough times. Have you gone through a career transition yourself like that? Or you've witnessed a ton of pro athletes who eventually retire from competition, and, do they go on to, like, I don't know, get an entirely different career, or can you take your skill set and bring it with you? What have you seen
Yeah,
in the athletes
yeah, I've
that you?
seen both. Yeah, to
It's a
your
hard
point, I
shift.
think.
It's a
Yeah, it
hard
is. It's
identity shift. I don't think it's unique to pro athletes. It's for everyone will go through career transitions, life transitions, and they're friggin' hard.
yeah, they are, and I think that's
Yeah.
the I think we don't, probably again, what's those big lessons we could democratize? Maybe it's how to handle that piece of the puzzle as we will all go through it. And I think you've seen it. We see it in returning warriors. We see it in athletes. We see it in business executives have been people who've achieved something in any given field, and then that is shifted. It's moved. It's gone away. They've retired, and I think that conversation is definitely one worth having. And there's so many lessons that we can share from what we've observed. And but I think the trick to that is having it. One thing I've learned over the years is have that conversation before it happens. So that's the
Mm,
biggest thing. And I think we started even at Red Bull. We
yeah.
started to say, look, at some point you're not going to be number one in the world anymore.
Yeah.
And we don't want to throw that right at the first day they sign up. But the
Yeah.
reality is with an you do want to start to have that conversation when you as early as possible, because planning for that, I think, and navigating that while you still have options is really important. I think what's happens when
Yeah.
the thing occurs, the shift, a transition occurs, and you no longer have the options, you suddenly feel like you're forced, even though you're probably not. But it's a
Yeah.
lot more, feels a lot more determined in front of you, and when it's right in front of you like that. And I think that's where you and I were discussing when you shifted. And then
Yeah.
even when I took the job at Red Bull, people in my field were like, "That is nuts. You are now doing the, working at the Olympic level, professional sports. That's where human performance was really starting to take off, and you're going to work with action sports and an energy drink company, and people are like, this is career suicide." And it was
Oh,
challenging at
really?
first to navigate that space. Well, it was very non-traditional. I mean, it
Yeah.
was not what you'd expect. People expect, go on and you become an athletic director, or you become even
Right.
a senior executive somewhere. The reality was that shift was dramatic. And then when Red Bull finished and I left Red Bull, I was like, I have to, the organization changed. I no longer fit. I made
Mm.
the decision to leave. It was like, wow, another big unknown. And that's when the
Mm.
Liminal group sort of idea was formed. And even then, even though I think I know that space well, it's just you're not prepared, and you have to
Yeah.
think about it beforehand and plan for it. And it can be
Yeah.
just the financial side of it, just
Yeah.
getting that squared up,
Yeah.
as much as it is the emotional and identity side. But I think the identity side is something that's really tough. And I've never been number one in the world of that in anything, but the reality of that idea of being tied up in your identity, and the psychologists will tell you, it's what you do, not who you are. But I don't think it's that simple. There's definitely, you've spent a career or a life generating knowledge and skills and friends and locations and environments that are tied to that identity. So I think that's
Yeah.
really the part that pre-planning we've seen makes
Yeah.
that transition easy. And
Yeah.
then to your point, a community when you
Mm.
roll, making sure you have your
Yeah.
community top. Because if you
Yeah.
don't have a community when you roll, you're going to be dealing with it on your own, which is going to make it infinitely more harder.
Yeah, it's pretty lonely. I mean, those were the two things I was going to hone in on. And just, yeah, I didn't really plan for cause yeah, I didn't plan. I was kind of year to year, what adventure am I going to do? And, I've been a business person my whole life. And so I've done pretty well. And I'm proudest of like the longevity I've had in my career and continue to have. But yeah, I hadn't planned for a shift. And so it kind of hit me on my ass. I hadn't planned for a crash, and I hadn't planned for, loss of some important business partnerships. But I think the awesome thing that's come from it is it's pushed me to look at my brand and look at really like, okay, what am I, my brand, or me really? I don't even want to use the word brand. And like, what am I about? What is that legacy? Like you talked about, what do I want to be talking about in the nursing home and be proud of? And the biggest thing, bigger than anything, is the community, you included, that I've met along the way. This is what I love about what you've created with Liminal is you've made a really awesome community of people that we all want to surround ourselves with. So, I think as
Yeah,
an individual athlete and as a high achiever, often, and this is what I do is, or have done, is like, oh, I got it. I just got to try harder, work harder, grit my teeth, don't ask for help. And that doesn't really work. It might work in some aspects of sport, like 24-hour mountain bike racing or something. Just keep putting your head down and keep trying harder. But it's not, that is where the athlete operating system, that is not a model that can
yeah.
be taken
Well, that's the
over.
event itself. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually through the event itself, but it's not the whole program. And I think you
Yeah.
nailed it. The community is probably the biggest driver. I think it's quality of relationships. I think the Harvard research, that
Yeah.
longevity studies, they've proven that point pretty clearly, that it's the quality of the relationships around you that really impact your life and the quality and your happiness. And so building that into the system, I think, is important. That's, as you said, the collective is a group of individuals just passionate about that topic, and we gather around projects and opportunities. And certain opportunities are more suited to some part of the group than others. But the reality is, it's an ongoing conversation, and that community is, I think, we didn't plan it this way by any sense, but now, given the way the world's heading, and the sort of lessening of community globally, I'll say, with respect to
Mm,
people shifting or opting for a digital community, which I don't
yeah.
think anywhere near the the support that you need. But that has become, I think, even more relevant now that we have that group, and that we actually are not just friends on a social media platform.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit because a lot of the principles in Liminal Collective and a lot of your performance models is, yeah, there's a ton of technology. There's a ton of stuff we're learning about the human body and the brain and all that. But so much of it seems to, as much as we know, it feels like a lot of it comes back to ancient practices. I mean, science is
Mm.
now proving the benefits of a lot of these things, but ultimately it comes back to what technology can't replace, which is a human
Yeah.
relationship. I'm interested in because you're deep in tech and all the developments and the stuff that's happening. And so, yeah, how is tech helping us and how is it hurting us? And like maybe reflections on some of those ancient models and in a modern world.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think, how's it helping? I mean, I think, one, it's in terms of the human performance space, we're learning at an exponential rate thanks to the analysis and the power of the machine and its intelligence. And so we're unpacking more and more about how humans operate. We're still a long way to go. I think that's, again, I think for most part, as I've said a million times, the human's the most complex entity in the universe, a single human. So I think we know about 10% of the whole system, especially in its
Wow.
integration, which is
Wow.
plenty. It gets
Yeah.
us a long way. We've done
Yeah.
well. But I'd say there's way more upside, way more opportunity. So that gives me hope, and the machine and the intelligence coming on board very quickly to really solve problems that have been unsolvable for us to date. So I think that's the real plus. And I think the challenge, though, is, and we call it the sort of human machine paradox, is with that acceleration in technology, and technology just exponentially increasing its capabilities, then the human, making humans more human, is the paradox. So as the tech gets smarter and smarter with tacit knowledge, the human then is left with a greater opportunity to focus on those things that you call, the ancient systems, the ancient wisdoms, the hallmark of a lot of the liminal programs is that sort of gathering the nature. They're finally figuring out why nature feels good, and we didn't. And so I think we have to take all that stuff that is inherently we feel and know to be true to ourselves, and keep focusing on those things like community and compassion and empathy and intuition. So our most advanced programs are tripling down on the human side. We definitely pay attention to the tech, and we're seeing it
Yeah.
like in things like digital twins and the ability to train you a digital manifestation of Rebecca and see what it looks like if you train at 100 miles a week for 10 weeks, and then doing
Right.
all that on the digital side using
Right.
pretty advanced AI, predictive AI models. And then you go, that's the best training program for me for the next 10 weeks. Let's go
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But the reality is also it doesn't capture all those things like you feel and need from that environment that you look for. And I think building the humanity back in the equation is the big part of the sort of
Mm,
human machine teaming conversation that we're involved in. It's how do you bring the human qualities and resurface many of them that I think that have been buried back up front and center, to allow us to partner with the tacit knowledge base of the genius in these machine models, and then bring the two of them together in such a way that we really do have a compounding effect.
yeah, I love the way of looking of that of making humans more human. That you're embracing tech and
Mm.
not abandoning humans, and you're not abandoning tech and embracing only the human side. You're merging them together to actually
Yeah.
benefit humanity. But I do think people get so honed into technology. And I mean, and maybe COVID was sort of a situation that it's really interesting for us. People can telework, and people rarely gather anymore, and it's rare that humans gather. Families don't live together, and one of the benefits, we moved into a rural neighborhood 45 minutes away from town, and I was really scared about the isolation of being up here. And what we found, we live in a small little community surrounded by public lands that there's maybe, I don't know, 40 homes or something, and it's a very tight community, and it sort
Yeah.
of makes, we have like weekly potluck dinners, we have a community garden that we've built, and when we lived in town there was more population, but we didn't know our neighbors in this way. And so it's been a really nice, one thing, I was afraid of the isolation, but it's been exactly the opposite of having less people, but more intimate relationships with our neighbors. And it just makes me feel like even when we're in a city or a mass group, no one is even looking each other in the eye on the street or waving and saying hello. And so how do we not lose that, Andy? How
I
do
think you
we,
just have to be intentional about it. I don't
yeah,
have any. There's probably way smarter people solving this problem, but I think what we've known is you just have to make room. You have to be intentional, and that helps. Now, whether
yeah,
that's the right way or the wrong way, and I know you know Reverend Sue and her whole philosophy in
mm,
this, but the point being that you do. I think there's connections which people I think have translated for relationships. Like I have a lot
yeah,
of connections, but the relationships is those spending time together, spending time,
yeah,
like you said, in the garden, in the mountains, whatever it is. And given the pace of the world and the technology tends to shorten our attention span, it's sitting down and having pause and reflection and creating space for
mm,
intentionally to just be around a community where the Western world in particular has less focus on that, I think, in the last 100 years than many of even the European or Eastern cultures. So I think that idea is, again, there's probably think tanks of people trying to unpack that conversation, but the reality is, I do know that if you're intentional about it, it makes a difference. And to you being out in that space, you are intentional because that's where you are. You're out in the middle of the community in a kind of remote area, and people have found that they need each other. And I think that
mm.
intention really sets the standard.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said about intentionally creating a pause, creating a space. I mean, it's why the title of this podcast, What's the Rush? People know me as this hard charging, always going, going, going. And, that's the thing I'm working on, is taking a minute and still training, still doing cool stuff, but taking a minute to sit and look at the sky, and the
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
health benefits of something like that. That's what
yeah.
I'm excited about. Technology is showing us, if you sit and look at the sky for 5 minutes, or you look at the morning sunlight or the evenings, like, technology showing us what that's doing to our brain and how it's helping us. And I'm
Mhm.
hopeful that that will convince more people to latch on by having some like proof of concept, I guess. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think knowing why really helps a lot of people. I don't think it's everybody needs it. I think a lot of people just know feeling good with it is good enough, and they
Yeah.
do it, and hence the lifestyles we tend to lead. But I also think once you put the math in there and the equations start adding up for a certain part of the population, it gives them, I don't know if it's permission, it maybe, just allows them to have that sort of assessment internally on why. But I
Mm,
think that's the challenge is if we wait for science to back
mhm.
everything about those sort of ancient principles that we kind of know and feel, we're going to be waiting a long time because it's still a lot more to be proven. So I like the idea of if we can just taking things on faith and saying I know a walk in the woods feels good for
Yeah.
me and I'm just going to do it and the science will catch up at some point if it ever catches up. And I'd say the challenge with technology is we've become so dependent on technology and answers and solutions
Mhm.
that the most important things probably can't be solved or measured at the present time, especially in the human performance space. So
Yeah.
go take a little, maybe trust and verify as the model,
Yeah.
trust your feelings, trust your intuition, trust your reception, And then at some point, if you need to verify it with the science, go for it. So again, the ancient systems were in place for a long time because I think they worked.
Yeah.
And so I think you've got to be careful if you throw that stuff away. Just they did, it's old fashioned. And
Mhm.
again, I think for people if they don't have the luxury of participating in some of the activities that obviously we've been able to do, being aware that just time away and time unplugging from that system gives the brain pause. And our brains weren't designed for this lifestyle that we
Ugh.
currently live in. They're just, the human system wasn't designed specifically for this. And it's a little bit of the evolutionaryist, if that's even a word, the evolutionary sort of framework. But we were definitely built for many, many centuries, hundreds, thousands of years, for a very different way of living. And I think
Yeah.
even though there were advancements in those times, I think the shifts now are at such a rate that the system struggles to keep up. So
Yeah.
create a space if you feel you need it. And, some people don't. Some people seem to just charge and
I
burn
don't know.
bright
I think
for a long,
a
long
lot of
time. I don't
people's
know. I don't
brains.
know. We'll see.
I agree with you. We weren't designed to have this much stimulus on our nervous system in a continual basis. And as you said, the human body is the most intricate, complex, amazing thing in the world that wasn't designed for what we're putting at it right now. And so, your point of interoception, which is knowing yourself from the inside out, and we can circle back to that's movement, being in nature, journaling, meditation, having conversations with people. Like those are kind of the pillars from a psychology standpoint. And like you said, we can tell if something feels good, and trusting the intuition of that. I mean, the whole brain injury recovery was a real red flag
Mhm.
wake up that our nervous system, mine, was overloaded, and all the skills and things that sort of I've learned to help myself recover, my brain recover from an injury, are all things that every human should do for cognitive health, as far as walking, exercising, meditating. It's not just related to an injury. And if we go back to the sports model, you don't want to wait till you're injured to fix something. You don't want to wait till it's broken to fix it. You're doing weights, you're stretching, you're doing all the things so that you're stronger when you are hit with something really hard, or you come up across a challenge, your body's ready for it. So,
Mm.
thinking about that same concept with the brain of like
Yeah,
making it
yeah,
strong and resilient so it can withstand the stuff we're asking it to do.
yeah. I think so. I think you nailed it. I think it's of all the human systems, the brain is the least of understood in terms of its
Yeah.
complexity. And I think there's a definite, pause, as you said, take a moment. The simple things seem to have profound impact. And again, that's excluding anything that's sort of like from a head injury, but even without a head injury, just both physical and sort of spiritual reset just breaks, I think now are more important than ever. And how do you find time to do that? And or more importantly, make time because there's a lot going on. And again, the human system by design doesn't like the uncertainty, and there's more uncertainty in the world right now than there's ever been in some respects. Or
Mm,
let's maybe reframe that to get out of trouble with the purists. There's probably more awareness of the uncertainty given our
mm,
the the information that we're exposed to, and that uncertainty seems to trigger a lot of anxiety, if you like, or just challenge or threat in the human system, which people have to then navigate day in, day out. And whether it's at a global level, they call it the polycrisis, climate, political issues, wars, you name it. You turn on the news and you get your fill of a lot of things that are probably in the background are spinning a lot of the sort of nervous system up. And then you layer onto that, things like we talked about, the oncoming artificial intelligence sort of wave of whatever you want to call it, wave of change.
yeah.
And that's going to be a profound impact on society. So there's a lot going on. And I think for us, it's one thing. Again, I think back to the kids, I think it's really interesting to try and think about for the youth of today, the younger people, what they're facing. because
Yeah.
in some ways, you and I have been there, done that a little bit. Not, not ready for the grave yet, but there's definitely less in front of us than behind us. So I think for those
Mhm.
people with more in front of them, it's going to be an interesting time to be watching and observing. And I think that's part of the issue. We're seeing increases in a lot of depression and mental health issues.
Yeah.
Without being explicit, there seems to be something triggering that, and to me, a part of it would be this massive system of uncertainty that we've created for the world.
So what are your just kind of your daily, how do you sort of manage uncertainty, stress, anxiety? What's the Andy Walsh kind of
Yeah, I wouldn't.
typical day?
You know the old saying, "The shoemaker's kids have no shoes." I think that's exactly. For me, I know that if I can get away, if I can get to the ocean, I get in the water, I get in the mountains. Like any
Yeah.
natural environment for me, really is a way of unplugging.
Yeah.
I've funnily enough read some recent research. You can't even have a podcast in. You just should have the brain open to the environment and not even be plugged into anything.
Yeah.
I think moving like simple as walking the puppy. I think that's why people with animals, dogs tend to live longer. Part of my theory of one is it just forces you to take a break and
Agree.
get out of your own way. I try to be intentional with the kids. I think the kids, it's easy to have that default into just Groundhog Day, and every day you feel like you're just trying to catch up and keep up, but taking a moment with them. But it's hard. Again, you got to be intentional. You got to pay attention to it and make time. Because for me, we're working for a living. I don't know what it's like if you're retired, but I feel like the moments that you sort of need to focus on, you have to pay attention to, because
Yeah.
otherwise, in my world, I just get busy. I got busy going from one thing to another thing to another thing, and then when I look back at the week, I've just been going from thing to thing to thing to thing, and I haven't really stepped back. I think vacations are critical. I think
Hmm.
the idea that you don't take a holiday, I don't know whatever asshole started that whole idea up needs to be bloody shot. I mean, that is the stupidest thing. I mean, you go to Europe and they take a month off, and it's
Right.
hard if you work in Europe, but my God,
Right.
imagine if everybody in
In
North America
Australia,
took
they take time off in Australia. It seems
we
to be the
used to take
US.
more than we do now. We're
Yeah.
following the North American
Oh,
model. So I think that idea of it's just, to me, I'm like, my God, who invented that? But the reality is, I think the more maybe that's the opportunity with the machine coming online, as smart as it's going to become, is it
yeah.
does give us more time to reflect and get back to ourselves.
I
I
mean,
think
that
that's the
is
biggest
the
threat we
shape.
face.
That's
Yeah.
how I'm trying to shape my little small business is use technology to free up space so I can go walk my dogs and go ride my bike. So that
I
is
mean,
again,
people are like, oh, these robots are coming for our jobs now because it was AI, now it's robots. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
if the robot can bloody mow the lawn and paint the house and clean up, I'm all for the damn robot doing that shit.
yeah,
Uh, I think so. But I think somehow we managed to fill our days up with other stuff. So I think to your point that letting that future state allow us to get more time, that's my goal. How do I use the
yeah.
technology to give me more time?
Making humans more human.
Yeah, if we can. Well, allow at least sharing that idea.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, Walshe, I love this conversation. I love that you're a peer and a mentor and a support in my performing life. Like I said at the beginning, you've impacted my career and my life in such a huge way, and I hope that the legacy that you have left for people already and will continue is so massive. So if people haven't told you that enough, you've changed
Hmm.
so many lives already. And yeah, I can't wait to see what happens next with you.
Well, thank you, Ray. And likewise, though, it's the impact you've had on my life and all the people I've been fortunate to learn from, including yourself. It's just continuous and it never changes. Every time we sit down and talk, I learn more about who you are and what you've done and how you've done it. And to me, really, the lessons that I've learned from you are equally as impactful. So thank you for that, and I appreciate you for all that. And
I
yeah,
know
hopefully
it.
some people take something from any of these conversations, and maybe that
Oh,
helps them. Yeah.
They will, and we need to set a date to go into the outback somewhere somehow and do another grand
At
adventure
my
experience.
pace, not your pace. At my pace, not
Absolutely,
your pace.
I love going slowly. All right,
Wonderful.
buddy.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks for
Thanks,
being
mate.
here.
It's a long and dusty road and a hot and heavy load. Folks I meet ain't always kind. Some are bad, some are good, some have done the best they could. Some have tried to ease my troubling mind. And I can't help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.